What's up, guys? Welcome to iRace's Garage. Today I'm really excited to be able to do a review on what has to be the most controversial guitar of 2024. Today we're reviewing the Trump guitar. So let's go. Alright guys, as you saw from the thumbnail as well as my intro, today we're reviewing the Trump guitar. And first and foremost, I want to thank my friend Aaron. This is his guitar, and he was extremely generous in letting me borrow it to do this review. So first I want to be able to set some expectations with this review, okay? This is not going to be a political review. I don't care if you love Trump, I don't care if you hate Trump. I'm reviewing the guitar, not Donald Trump. Secondly, I also want to make sure that we're looking at this from the perspective of this being a collector's item and not a gigging guitar or not a guitar that would be your number one. A lot of the comments I've seen about this guitar are criticizing it for its cost. I don't think anyone buying this guitar has any expectation that this guitar is going to be comparable to other $1,500 guitars. Nobody bought this guitar and ended up disappointed because it doesn't play or sound as good as their Les Paul or their American Strat. This guitar is considered a collector's item, memorabilia, Americana, however you want to put it, but the target audience for this guitar in all likelihood is not the normal guitar buyer. It might be someone that plays guitar, but it's really unlikely that anyone is buying this with the expectation that it's going to be as good as a similarly priced guitar. That said, because this is intended to be a bit of a collector's item, I think there are certain criteria for this guitar that still really matter. It still absolutely has to be a playable guitar. It has to function. It has to be of at least decent quality as far as guitars are concerned. On top of that, I think it also needs to have a great cosmetic finish, great workmanship, things that are going to help make it look great. So I'm going to go through my normal review. I'm going to take this apart. We're going to see what the quality of the hardware is. We're going to measure the pickups. We're going to weigh it. We're going to do all those things. But I think the real emphasis on this guitar and the person who's potentially buying this guitar and may benefit from this review is going to be focused primarily on it meeting a specific quality threshold and having great build quality and great cosmetics. My friend who loaned me this guitar is likely to hang it on his wall. It's going to be a showpiece in his living room. It's not a guitar he's going to be playing much, if at all. And I think that's quite consistent with the average buyer. So that's going to be the focus of my review, is to give the information that a potential buyer may want. That way, if someone's going to be buying this directly from the website that's selling these, or on the secondhand market through Reverb or eBay or even Marketplace, that potential buyer is well equipped to decide if this is a guitar that they want to spend that money on. So with that in mind, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to look at is that cosmetic quality. And I really want to focus on how this guitar is made, how it looks, and is it well put together. So starting with the cosmetics. Obviously the top is the major selling point for this guitar. This guitar has the American flag with the eagle right on the top. And this is really a bold looking guitar, and I think anyone buying this wants that bold appearance. Now, in terms of how it actually looks, it looks really well done. I'm not sure if this is a vinyl wrap that's underneath the clear coat or if it's some other manufacturing technique, but it looks really good. The colors are bold, they're relatively crisp. It does look like a photograph of a painting that's been put on here, and I think it looks really good. In terms of the finish quality, the clear coat looks really good. I don't see any real flaws in it. There is a little bit of a mark or an indentation right here. It looks like just a little bit of a crater in the clear that wasn't fully buffed out. The only real criticism I can offer in terms of the finish quality is that there's some sort of sticky goo right here. I'm sure it's going to clean right off. I'm not sure where it came from, but really that's about all in terms of how this top looks. Now, in terms of the binding, I think the binding looks good overall. There are some marks, maybe overspray in a couple of areas underneath the clear coat, but they're very minor. The binding in this corner looks pretty good. It's honestly better than on my Gibson. Little bit of marking right here in this horn area. Very minor, but certainly something of note. On the back, again, I'm really impressed with how this looks. Same thing with the clear coat. It looks like it's done well. I don't find flaws with it. All of the covers look like they're cut well. And one thing I wanted to point out here is that I think the mahogany itself actually looks really good. I've had a lot of multi-piece bodies on guitars where the individual pieces of wood are not well matched. And I've had it from Epiphone, I've had it from PRS SE, I've had a number of multi-piece bodies that it was clear the body was made out of just random pieces of wood that were drawn off the pile and put together. On this one, as well as the other ones I've seen pictures of, they all seem to have pretty well matched pieces of wood. And this one is no exception. This is a 3-piece body. If you're looking from up here, you can see the pieces. There's a joint here and a joint here. But when you look from the back, even where these joints are, it really looks quite nice. This joint might be a little bit more obvious in some places than the one over here. But in my mind, there was at least some attention paid to making sure that the individual pieces of wood were a nice match. The grain filling looks good. The actual figuring of the wood looks really nice. There's even some flame in some of this wood. Moving up to the neck, again, it's a nice looking piece of wood. It is a scarf joint construction here, which is something you generally see on lower priced instruments, but it has the advantage of making this headstock stronger because of the grain orientation. So this headstock is going to be less prone to a break than something like a Gibson. So now, shifting my attention back to the front of the guitar, I just wanted to take a quick look at this fretboard. Now, this is a rosewood fretboard, and to be honest with you, I'm really impressed at how nice it looks. It looks like a really nice piece of rosewood. It's got great figuring, it's nice and dark, it looks nice and smooth. Looking at the inlays themselves, they appear to be very crisp. It looks like a small router bit was used instead of a larger one like you see on some budget guitars. And because of that, you don't see big areas around all of the corners. Overall, I think it's really nice. Moving up to the headstock, it has a rosewood veneer that looks great. I think the silk screen up here looks really nice with the stars. One thing I did notice is that one of these stars, it doesn't look as good as the rest of them. I actually noticed that in one of the other reviews that I watched also. So it's not something that's unique to this guitar, and it's likely that the one you were considering buying may be the same way as well. But overall, in terms of how the guitar looks from an objective standpoint, I'm really impressed. I think it's got great cosmetics. Subjectively, I think this is tacky as hell, but in a great way. I mean, if you're buying a guitar like this, you want it to be tacky. And this one is very bold, it's bright, but everything just seems to look like it's well done. Now, moving my focus onto some of the hardware. I'm going to bring this down to the bench and we're going to go through all of this hardware in great detail. And that's going to include popping the back cover and looking at what the components inside are for the controls. We're going to pull the pickups and look at them. We're going to measure the pickups. We're going to weigh the guitar. We're going to check the action and the truss rod and all of that. But just looking at it from here, I wanted to point out that the components look like good quality components. Now, you may see what looks like some marks on the pickups, but that's because these still have the plastic on them, and I'm not taking them off. Again, like I mentioned before, I'm not sure what the owner's intentions are with this guitar, and so I'm going to leave those sorts of things just like they are. If he wants to pull the plastic off, he can do it. So anyway, as far as I can tell, underneath the plastic, the pickups I think look fine. I think the chrome is good. The rings look like decent quality. The bridge here and the tailpiece both look pretty good to me. This bridge actually looks a little bit nicer than I would expect from quote-unquote a budget guitar. It seems like a nice quality piece. It's a little bit wider than your typical Tune-o-matic. It reminds me of a Guiteau or a Sung Eel style bridge that I've used on a lot of guitars as an upgrade. But I'm curious to pull that off and see if there's any markings on it that'll help us figure out who made it. Likewise, this tailpiece looks really nice. The chrome looks great on it. It just looks a little bit better than some of the hardware I've seen on real low-end guitars. Now, the pickup switch here, This doesn't seem like it's a switchcraft. Doesn't look like a switchcraft from the outside, but it feels good. It feels good and positive. It doesn't have that super cheap feel that some of them have. The hardware for the straps looks fine. And then moving on to the tuners. The tuners themselves are unbranded. And just like with the pickups, they still have the plastic on them. I'm leaving it there. It's got the kidney bean style buttons on them. They look nice. The chrome appears to be good. And when I tuned this, I did notice that it tuned up very smoothly. It did feel like a decent quality tuner. That said, a lot of how your tuning feels has a lot to do with how well the nut is cut. The nut here looks good. The slots aren't a mile deep. And when I tuned up again, it felt smooth. And I did already do a little bit of a check on the nut slot height. And honestly, it looks pretty good. A lot better than I've gotten from most guitars out of the box. Speaking of how I got the guitar out of the box, I did notice that the action was a little bit high. I did a real quick check on the relief of the neck. It did seem like it had a little bit more relief than I might consider ideal, but nothing extreme. But we're going to go through that on the bench, which is what I want to go do now. So I'm going to shut the cameras off. Next time we pop up, we're going to be down on my workbench, and we're going to be taking this guy apart. So stick around. Okay, so I got the strings off. I did measure them before I took them off, and it appears that it came with 9 to 42s. So now that the strings are off, we can look at our bridge and tailpiece. We'll start with the tailpiece. And like I'd mentioned before, I feel like the chrome on this is a nice quality. Overall, I feel like this is a decent tailpiece. It is not marked. It's also not showing the ridge that you often see in the bottom of these. So it does look like they even polished the bottom of it before they chromed it. It's not very heavy, but overall, it feels like a nice piece. Moving to this bridge, like I'd mentioned, this really reminds me of the Gotoh and the Sung Eel bridges. This one is not marked, just like the tailpiece. Again, it's lightweight. It looks like it's got nice chrome on it. If you look at the saddles, you can see that the 3 treble saddles are facing forward. The 3 bass saddles are facing back. That gives you the maximum amount of intonation room. When I put the new strings on it, I will check the intonation. I didn't check it on the strings that were on it. But based on how these are configured, it looks like some effort was made to intonate the guitar initially. So now we're going to put those aside, and I'm going to pop off the pickups, and I want to see what the pickups look like. Now, once I get a visual of these pickups, we're going to put them back in, and we'll measure both the DC resistance and the inductance, and we'll see what that might tell us. Okay, so now that we've got these pickups out, we can look at the backside here, and we can see that they're, not surprisingly, an unmarked, unbranded pickup. So we're not going to learn a whole lot from this part of the exploration, if you will, except that we don't have a brand name pickup or something that's easily identifiable. While we're in here, I want to take a look around, and what I do see inside of these cavities is what's either shielding paint or possibly just black paint. But something has been applied to the inside of the cavity. The routing overall looks very good, and I don't really see anything that would concern me in here. Now, one thing I would have liked to have seen is if this had some sort of a maple cap as opposed to just an all mahogany body. Now, I'm not going to scrape this paint off of here because it's not my guitar. So what I can see from here, there's a little bit of a gap in the paint here, and even from this hole that's been drilled to the control cavity, I don't see signs of it being a maple top, which means this is just a solid slab of mahogany without a maple cap like you would get on an actual Les Paul. But again, all of the routing and everything in here looks really good. Now, moving up to the front, we don't really see too much. There's not much marking on the heel of the neck except for a number 1, so we're not going to really get too much from that. But again, the routing looks clean in here, and it appears that it's got the shielding paint. Matter of fact, let's measure and see if this is shielding paint. All right, so this is my LCR meter. We're going to use it as a resistance check right now. And what I want to do is get a couple of points on this, and you can see that that is in fact a shielding paint that's inside the cavity here. That's pretty impressive. I don't see a whole lot of guitars that come with that shielding paint, especially humbucker guitars. So that's a really nice touch. Anyway, we're going to get these pickups back in and then we'll measure them through the input jack. Okay, so now I've got the same LCR meter. Now I've got it plugged into the output jack because I don't want to disturb the wiring on this guitar. We've got everything set on maximum. And right now I'm on the neck pickup and you can see we're at about 8.1K. If I go to the bridge pickup, it's just slightly hotter, 8.2K. So in terms of the winding perspective, that's kind of in your PAF type of range, not far off from what you would get from a Burstbucker 2 and a Burstbucker 3. So now I want to go over to the inductance measurement. Still on the bridge right now, and you can see that this is about 3.25 Henrys. If we go up to the neck, right about the same at 3.22 Henrys. So what I can determine from this, that's pretty low inductance for a pickup that's wound to about 8K. What that indicates to me is that this is most likely ceramic magnets and not Alnico magnets. This is consistent with what I also saw or heard on some of the other review videos. One of the other YouTubers whose video I'll link to below, who is a much better player than I am, has played this and demonstrated it, and I found the pickups to be very bright and very detailed sounding. And that kind of ties in with what I'm measuring here with the lower inductance from the ceramic magnets and the relatively low wind of a PAF style humbucker. So overall, what I'm measuring is very consistent with what I expected based on what I heard. It's not going to sound like a PAF guitar. It's going to be brighter, but that brightness can usually be tamed with using your tone controls or a change of pickups, or if you wanted to keep these pickups and just swap to an Alnico magnet, I think this will get you very similar to that Burstbucker 2 and 3 territory. So anyway, that's that. Now I'm going to turn the guitar over and I want to take a look at what the electronics look like. Okay, so now I've got the back cover off, and interestingly enough, even though we had shielding paint in the pickup cavities, there is no shielding paint inside this control cavity. And I find that really odd, but I guess it is what it is. The other things I see in here is that we have dime-sized pots. We have the chiclet-style capacitors on the tone controls. Pretty standard fare for your low and mid-priced guitars. I guess I had hoped that maybe we would see a little bit higher quality electronics in here, but after seeing that the pickups were kind of a nondescript, no-name ceramic, I can't say I'm surprised by what I'm seeing in here. And lastly, we took off the switch cover, and not surprisingly, it's got a no-name Switchcraft style switch. So we're not going to learn a whole lot from that either. Just like with the control cavity, there is no shielding paint in this cavity itself. Just like with the pickup cavities, though, both of these look like they're well routed. The machine work looks really good. They obviously had sharp router bits. One thing I'm noticing that's kind of confirming what I mentioned when I was looking in the pickup cavities is that looking into this cavity here, all I see is mahogany. This routing is deep enough that had this had a maple cap, I'm pretty sure we would be able to see signs of it from in here. So, an all mahogany body, but again, I don't think that's much of a surprise. And lastly, I did pull a tuner off. Nothing on the backside except an X and an L4. I don't know what that means. It's not a brand or marking that I'm familiar with. So anyway, I'm going to get my B-roll footage now. I'm going to take pictures or maybe some video of all of these different things so that I can cut that in. Then I'm going to put it back together. We'll go back upstairs and I'll give you guys my final thoughts. All right, so we're back from the workbench. After I shut off the cameras, I did go through with a fret rocker and I checked all of the frets to see how even they were. I did find a few frets that were slightly higher than the rest. There was a little bit of rocking, but nothing significant, nothing enough to impact the playability or the sound of the guitar. After I strung it up, even with the action set below 4/64ths, there was no buzzing or no other problems stemming from those frets at any point on the neck of the guitar. So that's great. I did find that the frets were a little bit gritty. it's clear that this guitar did not have a level crown and polish like you would find perhaps in a higher end guitar. But overall, quite playable. As I started to play, they wore in nicely and now they feel good. So now let's weigh the guitar. I haven't weighed it yet, but if I had to guess, I would imagine it's going to be around 8 or 8.5 pounds. So let's give it a try here and see what we get. So 8.2 pounds. So right in that 8 to 8.5 pound range. Really a nice feeling guitar in terms of the weight. I think part of why it's not real heavy is that this is not quite as thick as a full thickness Les Paul, but it is a very comfortable feeling weight. So one last thing I wanted to touch on was that little mark that was in the surface right here. I had thought it was a piece of goo or something along those lines. It turns out that it's something a little bit more significant than that. I think it may have been glue of some sort. It was actually hard and I had to scrape it off with my nail. And even after using some rubbing compound and some swirl remover, there is a little bit of a witness line that's still there. So I guess that is one ding on the overall workmanship quality of this guitar. But with that in mind, now I want to give you my final thoughts. If you're in the market for a guitar and you've got a budget of around $1,500, is this the guitar that you want? Well, probably not. I think, much to nobody's surprise, the quality of this guitar is not on par with other $1,500 guitars. As I mentioned before, I think this guitar is really aimed more toward a collector, maybe a casual player, or somebody that wants to put it on their wall and look at it. And from that perspective, other than that one little mark I just got done mentioning, I feel that this guitar really hit its mark. The overall workmanship on the guitar, the cosmetics, the finish quality, the wood matching, the quality of the rosewood on the board, the inlays on the board, all of that I think is very nice. Where the vendor chose to save on costs is clearly with the quality of the hardware and the electronics. Although the plating looks very good on the bridge and the tailpiece, they're relatively lightweight. And I did notice specifically on the bridge when I was setting the intonation that the screw for the high E saddle was very tough to turn. The others that I needed to adjust seemed to turn smoothly like you would expect. But this one in particular was hard to turn. That said, I did feel like this Switchcraft style switch seems to work well. I was quite happy with how smooth the tuners are. So not all of the components have a cheap feel to them, and they certainly don't have a cheap look to them. As we saw with the pickups, those are a ceramic pickup, so they have that ceramic sound. They're brighter than a PAF, but I think they're a good sounding pickup overall, but definitely not a PAF. The rest of the electronics, again, those were low-end, dime-sized pots, but everything looked like it was well installed. The wiring, the solder work all looked like it was good. The nut seems to be very well cut. Had no pings and no issues with tuning, and the height of the nut slots is actually pretty good. I didn't have to take those down at all, so that was really a nice bonus. So overall, I feel like the guitar is a nice guitar. Does it compete with $1,500 guitars? Of course not. But is it a guitar that a person can buy if they're going to put it into a display case and enjoy it from that standpoint? Absolutely. The wood looks great on it. Like I mentioned before, I love how this looks. You don't really see the seams. Everything's well done. There's no manufacturing flaws to speak of other than that one little issue that I found here, which hopefully is an isolated incident on this one. Fortunately, I was able to polish it out, and now the guitar looks great. But overall, I think it's a beautiful guitar. If you're going to buy it because of its look, I think you can buy it confidently. If you're going to buy one to play, I think as long as you're willing to accept that it's not necessarily a $1,500 guitar, I think with a basic setup, it can also be a great playing guitar. If you wanted to swap the electronics, you can really make it into a great guitar. But ultimately, what this guitar is worth to the buyer is up to that buyer. I just wanted to give you guys the information to be able to make that decision. So with that, guys, I want to say thank you. Again, I want to say thanks to my friend Aaron. He's the one that owns this guitar. I think he's going to really enjoy it, and I really appreciate that he let me borrow it for this review. So until next time, guys, thanks very much.